What is up, nerd friends? Welcome back to the Nerd Bench. Thanks for tuning in as always, new every Tuesday, right here on The Charlie Show. This week, we're going to take a look at the Tunalyzer's Bluetooth capabilities. Tunalyzer is a fantastic tool if you haven't heard about it. It is for checking and tuning your brushless motors. It does censored, sensorless, 2-pole, 4-pole, many poles for that matter. And it'll show you things like RPM, amp draw. It shows you the rotor symmetry, which is how equally charged the rotor is, your Hall sensor deviation, which is how evenly spaced they are on the board, and it also does a Hall strength deviation, which is the consistency of the strength of each of the sensors. So gives you a way to really fine-tune or compare your various spec motors or whatever motors that you may have to see which one's the best for splitting hairs. But it also does the OTA features. It has Bluetooth built into it. You can plug it into an Xerun speed controller, or any of the speed controls that are compatible with the OTA, and do all the tuning. So we're going to plug that all in and take a look at that right now. So the OTA itself will not need power through this. You'll leave it disconnected from power so that all you're powering is a speed control. You plug in your favorite Xerun speed control, or like I said, it does work with the Max also. And then there is a port on the side of your Tunalyzer, and then you plug the other side of that into the top of your speed controls programming port. There used to be speed controls that use the receiver wire, but pretty much the entire lineup now has a dedicated programming port. So turn on the speed control. That makes the OTA come on. Then you tap the connection icon, or well, link icon right there. I said tap it. And then you select your HW device from the list. It'll connect. If it does ask you for a password, the default password for all of them is 888888. 6 number 8s. And then we can get into the speed control parameters here. We can do speed control firmware here, and we can do updates to the OTA itself through settings. You can also review data logging. But for the purposes of this, we'll take a look at the firmware update real quick. We'll go into firmware update, and if you are a fan of Blinky class racing, you'll know that there's been an update to that. Ends in an 05. This is a stock spec version of the speed control, and we can just do that by, it already self-selects it for you, but you can see you can roll back firmwares, all of that, and then you hit update or firmware update, and away it goes. This will take a minute, but we'll let it sit here and do that. 99 and 100. Once it's done, it gives you the confirmation that it was done. You hit OK, and then it reboots. Now, anytime you do a firmware update to a speed control, you're going to want to redo the calibration and redo all your setting changes. So don't just go in willy-nilly and update your firmware if you don't know what your settings are. And make sure that you double-check your calibration when you're done, because it is kind of like a reset of your speed control. To get back in, we tap Connect again, and then select this guy. Like I said, if you don't have your passwords, it's 888888. What the latest update is for roar racing specifically, or sanctioned body racing. The Blinky class of zero timing has now changed the rules that softening in the speed control is not allowed. So like stock spec, XR10 Pro 160 G2s, G2Ss, they all have softening that is no longer allowed to be used for spec class racing. So in order to be legal by the rules, you have to do this update. And it makes the speed control's red light blink different for Blinky certification. It does several rapid blinks, a pause, and then several rapid blinks and a pause, and it does that over and over again. So the Blinky output is different than it used to be, where it was just a steady kind of medium pace blink. Now it's faster, it has a pause, and that's the main thing. Subject, let's go in and look at what all these parameters do, because it's always good to refresh what all the different settings of a speed control do, especially with a stock spec. A lot of people think that some of the settings are going to make it drastically faster or slower. What are the best settings to run? That sort of thing is something I always have a hard time with, because there's not a lot of situations where something's best. There's just different, so to speak. And I have that conversation with customers all the time. What's the best this, that, and the other thing? And unfortunately, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just what's going to be different. And sometimes the loading does take a little bit of time, as you can see here. Once you get in there, you got your profile selection at the top. You can change the name, you can reset, you can import any saved profiles that you have. You can export the file that if you want to like zap your buddy's speed control with your firmware, you can export this, it saves it to your phone, and then when you connect to somebody else, you can import that file. Now, it only works if both of the speed controls are on the same firmware. So if they're not on the same firmware, it's not going to work. I've run into that before too. And then you have your save button. So when you make settings down here, if you don't push save, none of it's going to matter. It's just going to erase all that. So in the general settings, you have running mode, so you can turn on your reverse if you need to. You can change your reverse's full speed. The LiPo cutoff, thermal protection for the motor and the speed control. Now your motor thermal protection is only going to work with Hobbywing motors because they're the only ones that have the motor thermal sensor in there. There may be other ones out there. I'm just not super aware of them. So I apologize for anybody that has a certified Hobbywing temp sensor in their motor that I don't know about. Send me an email. Let me know. BEC is adjustable. All of the XRotor Series speed controls have adjustable BECs. You can turn the remote off is when you want to turn your car off after the race. You can just hold the brakes on, and if you, that's like a 5 count or whatever. I usually disable that. And then you can go between full sensor mode or the hybrid mode. And that's for if you have a motor that's sensor board isn't super good or you're unsure about the condition of the motor, you can run it in hybrid mode and it allows the motor to use censored and sensorless mode. Throttle control category has throttle rate control. This is like your punch setting. I typically run this all the way up. All the way up on throttle rate or throttle increase rate, if you will. Some of the other speed controls have it by different names. Is the punch setting overall. If it's any lower than the maximum, it's going to put like a time delay on your throttle response. So if you click to full throttle, it's not going to click to full throttle. Leaving that all the way up makes that very linear, so to speak. And then you can set throttle curves in here too. There's a customized curve where you can get in and adjust all of these different points and set things how you want them and make your own custom curve. I am not into that. I'm a big fan of linear throttle, but for some of the trickier situations or slick track deals, that can be very helpful. Neutral range is the deadband, or the difference, or the space, I guess you'd say, between throttle and brakes. So if you got like a real twitchy throttle input when you're at neutral, or if your throttle pot on your radio is worn out and you're not getting consistent drag brakes, you can increase that setting to help deal with that. Coast is to make the motor run on when you let off the throttle. If it's a very, very loose track condition and every time you let off the throttle, it wants to kind of get loose or spin out. Coast, you can turn that on to make it run on or coast when you let off the throttle. The PWM drive frequency is the duty cycle that speed control operates the motor at. Your drive frequency, higher is going to be smoother and then lower is going to be more aggressive. And it's done mainly for feel. A lot of folks make the assumption that the drive frequency makes the speed control faster or slower, and may feel faster or slower, but I'm not sure that that's entirely going to be the case. It's more of a feel thing. Higher frequencies are smoother, lower frequencies have more punch, and that seems to be the bigger thing. So a smoother frequency might feel faster because it doesn't come out of the hole as hard. It's hard to say. Softening value and softening range. These are not allowed for blinking racing, but if you're not doing blinky class racing or your track doesn't follow that stuff that close, these are like a traction control type setting. It's kind of like a current limiter. You have a value, which is how much power it's going to take away, and the range is the distance from 0 to full throttle that it takes it away. So eventually it turns off the current limiter and then you get back to normal throttle. So it allows you to really fine tune the front end of your throttle feel if you're running like modified motors. Not something you do with a stock spec, but then we get to our brake side of things. Drag brake is not brakes for drag racing. This is brakes when you hit neutral. So when you let off the throttle, it automatically applies some brakes, and you can turn that up or down. You can also control your max brake force. Sometimes 100% brakes is way too much, or maybe you don't have the tunability on your radio to turn the brakes down. You can use that here in the speed control. Initial brake force is the starting burst of brakes, if you will. So you can have this be higher than your drag brake value so that when you are coasting along on drag brake and you need it to snap, you can have that set higher. But for the most part, it's going to be at initial brake force because it's always going to be a drag brake force so that, if you were to set it lower than what your drag brakes is, you'd go to touch the brakes and it would actually make it accelerate, which you don't want. Brake rate control is like the throttle rate control. I leave that all the way up because it's most linear. If you have very sensitive braking situations or you have a hard time like modulating the brakes and you slap the brakes a lot, you can lower that because that'll slow down the brake response that you're putting in. Brake curve, like the throttle curve, you can set that to be linear, or there is a custom curve in there as well that you can set. You can set the brake curve much like you can. It's multiple points. It's a little tricky to use. It does take a little getting used to, but eventually it all works out. You just got to fart with it a little bit and then cancel. And then brake frequency, like the drive frequency, higher is smoother, lower is going to be grabbier or more responsive brakes. And then you have brake control setting, linear, traditional, or hybrid. Way the brake input gets translated into the speed control is what these are changing. And I'm not going to say that any of these are better or worse. It just gives you, some people are very sensitive to brake tunings, so allowing you to get inside here and change these and play with the brake control itself can be a game changer for some, but I'm not a big guy on brake stuff, so I tend to leave that at traditional. Timing. Now, speed controls have boost timing and they have turbo timing. Boost timing allows you to add timing in a specific RPM range. The RPM has a start and a finish, and that's where it applies the amount of timing that you put in there. Turbo timing comes on after full throttle, and again, it's an amount of turbo timing, and then that has a delay and how fast it feeds in and how fast it takes it back. And how fast it takes it back, it has to do with when you let off the throttle while you're in the turbo, how much it's going to take away as you let off, so that when you pick up the throttle, it's kind of at that right place again. All of this is kind of advanced tuning stuff, and I always tell everybody the same thing. If you don't understand what timing is, it's not something that you want to play with a lot. Small amounts are okay to give you a little bit more top speed, and in that regard, turbo is the safest way. If you're gonna have to want to use boost, you got to look at the data logs and kind of know the RPMs of the motor and see what's going on there, so that you can apply the boost in the right place. And now boost and turbo are all kind of the same thing, electronic time in advance. It applies an overdrive to the speed control's firing to make the motor go faster than it would without that overdrive. And for Blinky class racing, none of that's legal, so you can't have any of that turned on because it's cheating. And then it'll show you the data information that the speed control has saved in it as well. So you can check your highs and lows for temperatures, your RPM, and even minimum battery voltage, so you can see how far you're sapping things out. And if you do make any changes, don't forget, you have to hit save to make it all stick, otherwise it's all going to go away. And then once you hit save, it tells you all that fun stuff, then you back out of here, and you disconnect, and then you're all done. That is using the Tunalyzer as your OTA to do speed control updates, parameter changes, and all that fun stuff. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please shoot us an email, northamerica@hobbywing.com, and we will be glad to help you out. We do have videos on the Tunalyzer, how that all works with your motor, so we invite you to check those out. And we also do a podcast. The first and third Friday of every month, we do a new episode. Podcast is called RC Stuff, and you can find it on your favorite podcast service. We do give away a free Hobbywing system each and every episode. All you have to do to win is listen to an episode and find out how to enter. Well, as always, folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Charlie Show right here on the Hobbywing official YouTube channel, new every Tuesday. We'll see you next time.